Welcome, my dear ones. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we'll be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. This week we have the perspective of a father supporting his wife through two birth experiences. Matt reflects on his journey of stepping up and becoming more proactive in both the birth space and in parenting. He shares that prior to doing our course, he didn't realise how much of a role he could play in helping Bronte and how she was feeling it was all on her shoulders. This experience shook him into action, which, on reflection, helped him to grow much quicker into fatherhood. This is a wonderful story of teamwork at its greatest. And when going through some pretty big challenges with the health of their second baby, they were able to get through it together, securely bonded, and now able to manage the needs of two beautiful little boys. Matt has much wisdom, and this is an episode that should be shared with all partners of birthing women, so they can start to become familiar with the road ahead. Welcome everybody. Another week of the Transform Your Birth podcast. And I'm really, really happy this week to bring to you a beautiful partner of a birthing woman, my dear friend and colleague and also a participant in my courses. This is the lovely Matt. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks, Trace. It's exciting to be here and talk about this stuff.
It's good to have a partner in. I've had a couple of partners in the podcasts of the past, but I'm very fortunate in working with people in their pregnancies. I get to see a lot of them after birth. In fact, most of them after they had the babies, because of all the different things we do in parenting at Transform Parenting. And so when I hear them talk about their birth after, doing the preparation with us, the two biggest things that come back time and time again are the breathing was amazing and my partner was amazing. They really are the things that move the needle. So having a partner who can come on and talk about their role and, what they did to make the difference is really gold. So thanks, Matt, for agreeing to talk to me.
Happy to.
Okay, so Matt's had two babies, two boys, and let's go back to your first pregnancy. How were you feeling when you learnt you were going to be a dad, and what sort of preparation did you and your partner do?
So it's a really good and important question, I think, because in a lot of ways I was really confident and I was really excited. And both of my boys were sort of fertility specialist conception. So it was a very medical, clinical process. There was nothing surprising about it. It was very rational and it was very clear decision making for both Bronte and I. That's what we wanted, and this was the path of life that we wanted to go. But it also came with a lot of challenges, in that process as well. But it did give us the opportunity to communicate and talk and prepare a lot more than I think a lot of couples do, if it's not so intentional like it was for us. So we were really, really clear from the get-go around, what our roles were going to be and what our expectations were around having a kid and what changes we were going to make. What I wasn't kind of ready for, I think, was the feelings and the struggles and the fears that I hadn't quite had to manage or deal with or be aware of at any point in my life prior to that. So a lot of at least the biggest one for me is that I'd never even held a baby before the birth of my first son. Right. I'd had no close friends, no family members, no cousins or anything at all that were sort of babies or that I'd had any interaction with. So for me, I was very scared. I was very unsure. I was very uncertain in amongst all the excitement.
It was less about the birth, though. It was more about parenting, and that's very typical. Partners often don't worry so much about the birth. The birthing woman has this big wall she's got to
Mm,
get over, but they're
yeah.
thinking more in terms of parenting. So, what sort of prep did you and Bronte do?
So this is one of the things that I think that I wish I'd done better in that
Hmm.
first birth. Um, so we went through the motions. We did the hospital courses, and we did the information sessions, and we did that together. Um, and we also did a one of the Gottman therapy parenting courses leading up
Oh
to
yeah,
that as well for 2 days through the hospital. So we did the kind of step by step things that you're kind of required to do. But it got to a point where Bronte was like, I still don't feel like I'm ready or comfortable or I know enough about this. Let's
mm,
do the calm birth. Let's go to this was before I think you even were
yeah,
transformed parenting at this stage. And of course, just Matt being cruisy, go with the flow, supportive Matt. I said, yeah, great. That sounds awesome. Let's do it. What could go wrong? And it wasn't until I actually think that we got to your course
mm,
and did those 2 days that I realized how underprepared and how overwhelmed I really was.
yeah,
Because the course was so detailed and it was so practical
mm,
in terms of some of the narratives and the stories that you don't really hear
yeah,
about birth and how to support partners. And I think you have the, can't remember the number, the checklist. I can always
yeah.
remember the checklist. I'm not sure how many it was. But it was just this one thing. I was like, oh my God, there's a checklist for partners.
What to do and what not to do.
What? Like, why did nobody sort of tell me this? Like,
Yeah,
all the conversations were always like, oh, all the negative stuff, all the negative, oh, look out here, and you're really prepared for it. Is this really what you want? And your life's over. And then all of a sudden, we're coming into this course, and
mm,
I think we were about 30 weeks in, so pretty late, three-quarters of the way through. And I was like, there's more information out there. There's
yeah,
actually people who want to support partners and dads. There's things that I can learn and things that I can do. And I realized in that moment when we were doing that course that I'd been really holding myself back and avoiding and distracting myself and putting so much of that pressure on my wife because it was her body and it's women's business and it's, pregnancy. And I'm just here to support and I'll just do as I'm told, basically,
yeah,
was my
right.
mentality. Um, and that really kind of caught me off guard. And I remember from that point after doing the course and just being so sort of focused and enamored with everything that I was learning that the following 10 weeks was basically a different new Matt.
Mm,
I bought more books about men and birth, supporting partners, and I started practicing a little bit more and being a little bit more intentional. I went out and got more stuff for massages for Bronte, and I was reading through all of the books around pressure points and actually practicing those things. Whereas before that, I was kind of just cruising along, and I wasn't
mm.
really doing anything proactively, I
Yeah,
suppose.
what you're describing there, Matt, is powerful because it's your whole mindset shifted from being a passive recipient, or not passive
Mm,
recipient, but a bystander,
it
to
felt
now being,
passive.
oh,
Yeah,
actually, I've got a really important role. I've got to step up to the plate.
exactly.
And gosh, that makes a difference, not just
Mm,
for you, but also for her, because she doesn't feel
exactly.
the pressure and the weight to hold the whole birth. She knows that you've got her back,
Mm,
and that
mm,
she gets very, very clear on her role, and you get very, very clear on your role. And boy, doesn't that make a
mm.
difference when you become parents as well.
It
Like
really
it's
does.
teamwork, not just, oh, I'm a
Yeah.
mother. It's teamwork. Yeah.
And I think that was the bigger one of the biggest outcomes for me as I stepped into this new mindset was
Mm,
the our capacity for connection, in the relationship
yeah.
just grew exponentially. Her
Mm,
trust and her confidence in me, whilst it wasn't bad, and we had we've been together 11 years now. At this point, we were sort of 6 or 7 years in. Everything was going really, really well. There was still that those elements and those parts of her that were like, oh, he's still relying on me
Mm.
to tell him what to do. He's still
Mm.
relying on me, and I'm new to this too, and I have no idea what I'm doing, and
Yeah.
no one's giving me the advice, and I have to be proactive. So now I have to do it for both of us, right?
Mm.
And whilst that was only a small part, and we managed that, quite well, it wasn't until this point where I noticed in myself, okay, I have to step up. I
Mm.
have to understand and realize and notice what's going on for myself that's holding me back,
Mm.
right? From stepping into being the kind of partner and ultimately father that I want to be.
Mm.
And that has basically become the internal mantra and mindset that I've had
Mm.
since that time, since that course, right? For me, where I've been not always perfectly and not always well, proactive rather than
Mm.
reactive in my capacity as parenting.
Yeah.
Um,
Gosh, Matt, what you've described there is so um, significant in
mm,
recognizing that both parents are on a growth path. And when
yeah,
it's really, really physiological and so real for women because it's happening in their very bodies,
that's
that,
right.
and there's a lot of hormonal shifts and a lot of,
Mm,
that blueprint, I call it the blueprint of potential, starting to be activated. She's starting to
I
be
love that.
upgraded. She's starting to become the bigger version of what she is. And for partners, they can be a little bit behind because it's not so physical. And then when the baby lands, their life sometimes can even appear to kind of continue on because they need to go back to work and life sort of
Right?
looks a little bit similar. But for her world's been shattered. She's on
That's
a
right.
feeding regime around the clock with a
Hmm.
newborn baby. And so often when I talk to new parents, we often discuss this. I say your partner's going to be just a little bit behind you in terms of their growth and their activation and their upgrade. But what you've said there is by preparing people the way we do and other programs like Calm Birth and
Mm,
Hypnobirthing to do this sort of thing as well,
mm,
is what when we start to help partners see that they're not just bystanders to hold her hand and say, breathe, darling, breathe, you're doing great, but actually have a
mm.
really important role that is not only important to the emotional well-being of the mother, but it actually helps her to activate the best hormones that she can, which actually influences the physiology of her birth.
Exactly.
That just changes everything. So
Well,
it
one
sounds
of
like you activated your blueprint of potential much earlier because of that.
yeah, yeah, and I'm lucky and sort of privileged in the position that at this time I was studying to be a counselor, and
Yeah.
and I was doing a lot of reflective work, and
Mhm.
I'm naturally a very kind of deep and analytical and reflective person naturally, so
Yeah.
I have that benefit and that privilege on top of a lot of
Mm.
guys where their fears will remain so sort of unconscious and subconscious that um, it can become really, really challenging to identify them and overcome them, which makes a lot of sense for
Yeah.
guys. Like we're not taught how to do this. We're taught to be
No.
very analytical and logical, and the socialization that we get is very problem solving oriented. And when we become the problem and we become the barrier, there's this dissonance that happens, right? Where we go,
Mm.
well, I know I need to change. I know I need to grow, but also there's that shame and that guilt and that confusion and that inability to
Mm.
know what to do moving forward. So when I came into that program and for you, and in your program, I should say, that was the point where I said, it doesn't matter how I'm feeling. It doesn't matter, you know, this shame and this guilt and this confusion and this fear that I'm holding for this new version of Matt that's trying to come forward. It's my job to do that because, like you said, my only goal and my only purpose was to give my wife the best opportunity to have
Mm.
the best experience no matter what.
Yeah.
I knew that that was the ultimate problem,
Mm.
for me to solve.
Yep.
And if I was ignoring myself and the way that I was inhibiting that and the way that I
Mm.
was putting up those barriers for her and
Mm.
causing those stress, then I was, you know, contributing and adding significantly to
Yeah.
that problem. So I had to step up. if that
Yeah.
was really what I wanted.
Yeah, you had
Um,
the insight and the foresight to see that's what the situation required. That's a really
exactly.
interesting insight that you've shared with us. And for those listening, it's dawning on me. This is the episode you need to share with your partners, because I think the helping partners to realize how important they are, but their growth period can be enhanced when they really do
Yeah.
realize how much she needs them,
Yeah.
and then how much they can contribute and
Mm,
resource themselves in order to
yeah.
be able to support not just her experience of birth, Matt, but also the welcoming of this baby and setting you up for
That's
the other
right.
side, because that's what birth is doing. It's helping you to be ready to
Mm,
parent that child. And in order for that to happen, if we can optimize her hormonal release and her physiological response to birth,
mm,
whatever ends up happening, then you're
mm,
ready. You're in a better position to get to know your
mm.
baby. So tell
That's
us
right.
about how the birth unfolded and
Um,
what your
yeah,
role
so
was specifically, Matt. I'm really keen to know that.
yeah. So the first birth was just a classic first boy who did not want to come out at all. And so my first son was 11 days overdue, and obviously nothing went to plan in terms of Bronny wanted to go into labor naturally, and we ended up having an induction on a Friday afternoon, late on a Friday afternoon. Um, and it was all wonderful. The experience was really, really good, and Bronte was ready for it all to be kind of, I think you call it the fuck it moment, or something along those lines. It was just, she was like, yeah, fuck it. It needs to happen. And
Yeah,
and so we went in really sort of positively going, yep, this is not what we wanted, but this is the right way to go. And we felt really confident in that. And eventually, 24 hours later, there was the induction worked, and Bronte went through all of the motions and utilized all of the skills, the breathing techniques. Interestingly enough, I like to tell a story that we did have that planned. We had, Bronte knew very clearly after our course with you around, ideally, no meds, and no epidural, and going through naturally, and maybe some gas, and then we asked for the room with the bath, and she had all of her food that she thought she might be able to snack on over the course of that period of time. And what ended up happening was she didn't want the bath, she didn't eat anything at all. She refused um, to basically do anything on her list of things that she wanted. She printed out cards and laminated them, and she's like, "Don't put them on the wall. I don't want to see that shit." She didn't want the music. She ended up getting the epidural, and she had morphine, and and
she
but
changed the rules on you, Matt. She
she
totally
changed.
changed the
She
rules
didn't
on
want
you.
me holding her hand. She didn't want me supporting. Like, there was, I
She was a
became.
beast.
She knew, but the thing is like, in that
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that moment, she knew what she needed,
yeah. Good point.
right? And
Mhm.
and and she trusted me to support her in doing that, right? And
Yeah,
so for me, you talk about my role. I always sort of chuckle when I think back on this kind of feeling very sort of scattered, and feeling very like, well, this is not what we planned, and this is not like, you're changing the rules on me here, because we'd sort of talked about that, and I had sort of done a lot of my own work. I sort of said, yes, no worries, and the bath is right there if you change your mind, right? And I've got the
yeah.
speaker
Nice.
here if you find yourself needing some distraction. And the cheddar shapes and the water bottle and all of the things that we prepared, they're just here on the table. If you need it, I'm going to offer, and if I notice something, I'll bring it to you. Just say no. Right. So I was trying, so I had the capacity to be flexible in
Yeah,
those moments,
good.
to build out the options, right? Even though
Mm,
all the plans had changed, and everything kind of, she didn't want anything she thought she would, right? I was still there to say, you don't want me to hold your hand? All good. I'm
mm.
still here. I'm right here. You know,
And
water.
when she
No.
talked to you about that later, was she really, did that make
Yeah,
a difference to her?
I
Yeah.
think so. She says that it did, and I trust
Mm.
her.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Knowing
she
you're
talked.
there.
It caused. I think for her, it caused a little bit of guilt, right, around changing it all on the day and not
Oh,
being
no.
clear, as you can imagine,
Mm.
right? But the thing that she talks about is trusting me to be able to handle and manage myself in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
moment. She did not at any point have to worry about me and what I was
yeah,
doing
yeah.
and any of those things. The midwives were just saying, "You do you. You doing great. You just keep doing what you're
Mm.
doing, Matt." Right. So there was no support
Yeah,
needed. I was confident. I was secure. I was really strong in
yeah,
what I needed, and I wasn't taking anything personally. I wasn't saying that I had done anything wrong,
yeah.
right? But
You had to
this
be
is what you needed.
flexible. But
I just that
that
flexibility.
that's powerful what you've just said. Being women in labor need to go into the zone. They need to go into what's
That's
called the
right.
primal brain. And the thing that will stop them from doing that, from being able to work with the birth in that part of their brain, is worrying about partners or people
Mm,
around them. And so the
yeah.
importance of partners being able to regulate themselves, being able to
Yeah.
roll with what is, being able to
Mhm.
adapt to the, I mean, let's face it, Matt, be honest with you, women change the rules all the time, not just in labor. Is that not
It's
true?
right. It's a part of life. We all do it.
It's
We all
part of
change
what
the
makes
rules
us
all
so
the time.
interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, of course, we're going to do it in labor because we're the birthing goddess and what we say goes.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you just roll with that, which is amazing. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. I think there can be a real sense of sort of powerlessness and a lack of control for men and for partners in that room,
Yeah.
not being able to really support or do much in that
Mm,
space. And whilst you know birthing individuals end up, they do go into that primal brain and they lose that sense of time, and
mm,
they're really focused on their bodies and on themselves, and they've just got that singular focus on giving birth. For those partners in the room, we don't have that sort of, not that it's a luxury per se, but we don't have that
yeah.
innate, natural, protective mechanism of pushing
Mm,
away everything. We see it all. We
yeah.
feel the full 24 hours. We still need to eat. We're not getting
Mm.
that sleep. We're not getting,
The performance
those,
enhancing hormones.
yeah, all of those things. We just get the anxiety and the cortisol and the stress,
Yeah. Well, hopefully
um,
not, but yes, you're right though. It's
you
much
know,
more vivid, and she goes into
mm,
labor land, and it don't ever underestimate the role the partner plays in terms of the energy and the
yeah,
focus. As a doula, I used to play the same role, and
mm,
you'd come out
exactly.
and you'd be
Yeah.
high as a kite because the watching a baby being born is amazing.
Yes.
However, you'd bloody sleep for the next three
Yeah,
days.
it is exhausting.
Yeah, it's
It's
exhausting.
emotionally
Mm,
draining. And I just feel like that's it's a good thing, and we want to be
mm,
aware, and we want to be conscious, and we want to be, hyper vigilant in those
mm.
spaces. It is our, it is a natural inclination to kind of step into that protective, problem solving kind of space as a
Yeah,
partner, as a
yeah.
man, whether socially or biologically, I wouldn't even know. But the importance of, like you said, being able to regulate that into a safe place rather than into an anxious, nervous kind of space,
Mm,
right, is incredibly important to say, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I've got this. I can manage myself. I can do this.
yeah,
And you just focus on you. And that really sort of was able to move the needle, I think, a
yeah.
little bit for Bronte, that she didn't have to worry about me. And that
Exactly.
that played out perfectly in our second birth as well. So the
Yeah, yeah.
second birth was very, very different. He was 2 weeks early, and it all came very naturally, and we were in the hospital within an hour, and fully dilated, all the way through to, so I think, 8 centimeters in the first hour or two. And then within sort of 3 or 4 hours we did find out that there was a complication, and it was another emergency C-section. But there was so much confidence, and there was so much clarity that despite the complication and again, the plan sort of not coming to fruition around having a VBAC and a natural birth the second time round.
Yeah.
I should say vaginal birth, not a natural birth, a vaginal birth the second time round,
Mm.
that there was no anxiety, there was no trauma, there was no um, concern or lack of confidence in the decision that we made to
Yeah.
move towards the emergency cesarean.
Yeah. So let me just get this clear. With your second birth, your labour was much quicker, but there was concern
Yep.
about the benefit of about the baby.
Yeah, so the baby's heartbeat was dropping every time she was having a contraction. They were having a very, very difficult time monitoring Bub's heartbeat
Yeah.
throughout the labor once we got to the hospital. And it was just a very different process to our first birth, where for nearly 24 hours we had one midwife in the room for the majority of the time, whereas here, within an hour of being there, we had multiple nurses, student nurses, obstetricians, admin staff coming and going. It was very bright. It wasn't dark. It was a very different experience, just because of the concern for the baby. But
Right.
ultimately, that obstetrician just said, look, we could keep going. We're not 100% sure that that's the best way to go.
Mm.
And the baby does seem to be in distress. We've tried everything that we can try to make sure that the heartbeat is not just like a monitor or a technical issue or any of
Yeah.
those things. So there is a risk that there is something going on for Bub, and he is in distress every time Bond goes into contractions.
Mm.
So what would you like to do? And we'd both already made this decision before that time, and I just said, let's go straight for a cesarean.
Mm.
And Bronte and the mum said cesarean, and we went down, and within sort of 15 minutes, half an hour, Bub was born through that process. And turns out the cord was wrapped around his neck a number of times,
Yeah.
and it was the best thing we could have done.
Yeah.
So it didn't work out, and there is a lot of grief and a lot of frustration, I think, around both of the births for us ending up, for my wife not being vaginal births, which was kind of her ultimate goal. But
Yeah.
the decisions that we were able to make were with full confidence that they were the best
Mm.
decisions in the moment. And
Mm.
we know that now. And we do still hold a lot of gratitude, to
Yeah.
live in the kind of era and the time and the society we live in,
Mm.
where, they might have been much more
Yeah.
medically risky in a different time, for
Yeah.
both Barb and or for Bond. So we do hold that gratitude, and we hold the grief, around,
Yeah.
not things not going to plan at the same time. And we still grapple with that even, today,
Yeah.
4 years later.
This is part of, the dilemma we have as people going in to birth these precious babes, is we're
Mm,
walking into the mystery, and we can have ideas and ideals around the way we want to do things, but ultimately what the mystery is, it's requiring us to trust in our own path and our own journey of what
mm,
unfolds, and being able to make the right decisions from a place of confidence, like you described. And I want to
mm,
know more about that in a minute, with a place of
sure.
confidence and a place of strength, and working, really well with your caregivers to get the best outcomes. That it doesn't always turn out the way that we want to. But
Mm,
interestingly enough, though, and this is certainly, I don't know if you can help me here, Matt,
mm,
clarify anymore, but when I watch women long enough, I can see that they often reclaim what gets lost in birth. So women who've ended up, being separated from their babies, or
mm.
had a cesarean over a vaginal birth, or a vaginal birth rather than a cesarean. I mean, those things can happen too.
Yeah.
That they subconsciously, inadvertently tend to make up or reclaim what gets lost. So they become, it influences their motherhood. For example, one woman who had a separation between her and her baby with the first birth, and really set it up. She was having a home birth for a second, really set it up so strongly that there wouldn't be separation after birth. And there ultimately ended up being separation.
Mm,
And what happened as a result of that is she once that baby came back to her, she wasn't letting go of that baby for a long time.
Right.
She carried that baby with her a lot, and then when I debriefed the birth with her, we were able to talk about that, and I said that's you reclaiming what got lost. So with that in
Mm.
mind, can you see now, you talked about the grief and the struggle you've had to overcome that. What do you think the influence of that has been on your parenting and reclaiming potentially what got lost in that space?
Um, it's a good question. I probably haven't given this a lot of thought in terms of
Big
the language
question.
of reclaiming it. Yeah.
Mm,
But I think the first thing that comes up for me as I sort of hear this is that it makes a lot of sense to me that we'll have these that will create both for both parents these sort of protective, reactive
mm,
um, parts of us that come about as a result of that experience. Like, so to
yeah,
me,
yeah,
like the language you're using around reclaiming, those things that we might have lost, that pushing through the grief
yeah.
of not having, of things not going to plan, or of having, whether there's a detachment or whether there's a loss, or what there's that we're going to have these parts of us that get generated and
Mm,
created in order to protect us from that
yeah.
pain and that grief. So to me, that idea that maybe for some people that protective
Mm,
mechanism ends up being like a move towards reclaiming that,
yeah.
and for others it's going to be moving away from or
Mm,
distancing themselves from that pain or from that challenge. And I think either way, it's important for us to recognize, both as partners and for those who actually experience the physiological side of this, that's a normal process.
yes.
Like, regardless, there is no right or wrong way
No.
to react or to respond to these experiences.
Mm,
There is just the way that we do
yeah.
react and respond.
Yeah.
And so if you're somebody who doesn't reclaim, and doesn't, move towards, and, maybe you feel distance, or you feel disconnected, or you feel like you've failed, or you feel like your body's not working, or those sorts of things, that's normal and appropriate too.
Mm,
And as a partner, it's important for us to recognize that if that is the case for our loved ones, then we don't need to try to change that.
mm, mm.
We don't
'Cause-
need,
yeah.
we don't need to try to fix it or problem solve whatever it is that person's experiencing.
Yeah.
Right.
The
So,
story's not over, Matt, at that point, is it?
right,
And
right.
and that's what I mean. Watch long enough and watch the
Exactly.
trajectory that whatever unfolds in the mystery has become your path that you've got to walk.
Exactly.
And whatever the response to that is absolutely fine because it's your
Mm,
path. And
mm,
ultimately, it's inviting you to overcome,
yeah.
to step up, to upgrade, to resource, to find ways of managing, to find ways of integrating, to find ways of
Yeah.
growing. That's ultimately what life does. And when you watch the journey long enough, and it could be months, it could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be months, it could be years. But when you
Years.
watch it
Yeah.
long enough, you see people come full circle and
Yeah.
take, particularly if they're well supported to do that and they're reflective
Yeah.
and they think about that. But that's what life is inviting you to do. And that's why I get fascinated by this part
Yeah.
of life, of inviting, or not inviting, giving birth to a,
Yeah.
a human soul.
Yeah.
You cannot not grow. Like every part of it is causing you
That's
to
right.
learn and to grow with those babies.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you obviously went through a lot, Matt. Tell us about the bonding and what it's
Yeah.
like when you met your boys
Yeah. So,
as a dad.
yeah, it was interesting. So I was pretty lucky at the time to be working for an organization for the first birth. I was working for an organization where I got 3 months fully paid paternity leave alongside Bronte as well. So I actually spent the first,
Fatherhood.
yeah, I know, and I just there are very very few other guys and fathers out there I know who get that opportunity. So I took it with
Mm.
gusto. I did half pay for 6 months. I added on an extra month of annual leave on top of that as well. So I ended up having 7 months off in the first in the initial
Wow.
period with alongside Bronte. So we were actually at home
Mm.
together during the core of that period. So, you know, my bonding process with Liam, my first son, was awesome.
Mm.
I was there, I was present, I was active, I had the time, I wasn't worried about work, I wasn't worried about money. Everything was planned and prepared, and it was really relaxed, I think is probably the best word that I think a lot of people have a lot of stress, but for us it was just we can just cruise. We can just do what we got to do. Um, I did have a difficulty and a challenge emotionally connecting with Liam at the time. And I think
Mm.
that was as a result of my own sort of fears and anxieties around if I'm
Yeah.
doing this right and do I like this and this actually isn't that fun and isn't what I was expecting and I'm
Mm.
tired and those sorts of things. But as he as he's grown older, he's nearly 4 now, that dissipated really quickly. But it was my first inclination into the challenge of connecting, I
Mm.
suppose. And I remember talking to some family members about it, going, "Yeah, I love him, and I do everything for him, and I'm up every night, and I'm helping, and I'm actively involved. But I feel like there should be more. I feel like it should, I feel like it's not enough, right? It's not what people talk about." That came later, much
Yeah.
later,
Right.
for me. But it was my first inclination. When Hugo was born, um, I felt much more confident. I felt much more connected very early on with Hugo. I was like,
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing. I've got this down pat. I know, there was a lot less anxiety and stress
Mm.
getting in the way, a lot less fear. And by this stage, I'd also done a couple of years of therapy and working through my counseling degree and, all those sorts of things. So I was
Mm.
in a better headspace with Hugo as well. What I wasn't expecting was just how different the two boys were. Um, so what we thought was really challenging with Liam actually ended up being him being a wonderfully easy, cruisy sort of miracle baby almost, sleeping through the night from 3 months and breastfeeding like a absolute legend, and being happy, and he wasn't grizzly. He was just really content. Hugo came along and we've only just started sleeping this year. He's nearly 18 months. And he had multiple tongue ties. He didn't breastfeed. He had food intolerances. He didn't sleep. He would only sleep on me, not on my wife, upright in the feeding chair. So for the first 12 to 13 months, I slept upright on a feeding chair with my younger son on me. My
Wow.
back was in pain. I was up every few hours taking him for feeds and changing nappies and those
Mm.
sorts of things. We've later found out, that he had overly enlarged adenoids. He needed grommets. His tonsils were enlarged. He couldn't breathe,
So,
basically.
Matt, you had a big journey with Hugo, not being
Mm,
well and having those conditions of food intolerances and adenoids and not being able to breathe, and so that's pretty intense. And
mm,
as you look at that situation now, can you see yourself coming back to this idea of reclaiming? Can you see yourself reclaiming
mm.
that quality time with Hugo at a point like now post that he's not quite so difficult to be with?
Absolutely.
Mm.
I'm really proud of the way that my wife and I coped and managed and
Yeah.
parented our way through it, even through all of the really difficult times we did. We were very conscious and aligned, and we were constantly talking about it and
Well
debriefing.
done.
Um, you know, we were constantly reassuring each other. It's okay. Your anger, so for me, my depression came out a lot in passive aggression and defensiveness and isolation and shutting down and anger. right, which is pretty common for men,
Mm,
um, and also for mothers as well. That anger and aggression. And yet, through all of that, at no point did Bronte make me feel like I was doing anything wrong or ashamed, and that it was all a natural, normal reaction to a really stressful situation. I've been able to offer that now as I've processed and moved that through, as the kids are moving into toddlerhood, and and as Hugo's sleeping better, he's more active, he's more engaged, he's doing a lot more. He's also very, he's drawing on floors, and he's throwing food to the dog, and he's doing all of these things that would have really set me off a year ago, right? That I can now really be with him and be present and mindful with him in that, and hold my own stuff in a much sort of better way for the whole family, like I mentioned. So yeah, I think that word of reclaiming is that the more I've focused on myself and my own self-care, and I love that word you used earlier around resourcing, like the
mm,
more I resource the parts of me that had the awareness and the perspective and the skills and the tools, and caring for the parts of me that didn't, that
mm,
really struggled,
mm,
that was a huge step forward for me in I suppose becoming the kind of dad and the partner and
mm,
husband that I want to be. Reclaim that
mm.
that safety for everyone
Yeah.
around me.
Your story just really, I feel, highlights so clearly the maturation that we're all going through when we have children.
Yes.
From those
Yeah.
first responses you talked about, for, I'm not enjoying this. This is not fun. I thought this might at
Yeah.
least be fun. And it's tedious. It can be mundane. It can be boring,
Yeah.
but it can be joyful. It can be fascinating. It can
Mm,
be mesmerizing. It can be all of those things and everything in between. It really is an array of different emotions and feelings you go through when getting to know your baby and
that's
all of
right.
those things. Um, so as you've described so beautifully, over time you've had to not just get through the birth, but you've needed to be the partner Bronte needs you to be. You've needed to overcome your resistance to your own children and the
Mm,
struggles that we have in getting to know them
mm,
and meeting their needs, to resourcing yourself through your own personal mental health journey and
that's
through
right.
medication and being able to understand more and more about what your system needs to be healthy and well so that you
Yeah,
can be there for your family. It's a beautiful narrative around how this works. It is a continual stepping up. And here I am now, 27 years down the track, and I still feel like I'm doing the same thing, so
yeah.
it's
I
not something that finishes when they sleep through the
That's
night or
right.
finishes. Like, it is a
Exactly.
continual process. And
Yeah.
it's beautiful for you to have shared your story, your very intimate story about
Mm,
the challenges that have been inherent to what you've gone through, you and beautiful Bronte have gone through. So, Matt, if you could give your a partner some
mm.
advice, what would you tell them if they're a pregnant partner wanting to be there for their beloved?
What would I tell a pregnant partner how to support their
Yeah, a partner with a
support partner?
pregnant. Yeah, sorry. Did I say that? A
No, I'm
person
because
a person who's wanting to support a
a
pregnant
pregnant
woman
partner.
through
Beautiful.
birth and into early parenting.
Yeah. I'll go back to the point I made at the start. The most influential and impactful thing that we can do is to be proactive
Mm,
in the process. And
yeah.
whatever that looks like for the supporting person, whether that's education, whether that's personal development, whether that's um, um, mental health support, whatever it is that you
Mm,
need, it's our responsibility to work on ourselves enough so that we don't act as additional barriers that our pregnant partners need to manage and cope with and deal with.
I love that.
They've got enough.
Yeah,
And
they do.
it's as hard as that is for us to want to do that, to want to get out of the way. Sometimes that's, or most of the time, if not every time, that's going to be the best thing for us to do. And so for me, I would say read more books, do more courses, go to counseling, go to therapy, right? Do what you've got to do before that baby comes, and before, like me, you're 30 weeks in and you've only got, sort of the last 25% of the pregnancy to go before you realize this, right? I wish that I'd started doing this even before we got pregnant, at the start of that decision making that we're going to start trying. I would be starting to look into, what does this mean to me? How do I get out of the way?
Mm.
Right. How do I be the best, most supportive partner I can be?
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for saying that. I really think the current narrative around pregnancy and birth is focused on, what to buy, what sort of car
Yeah.
seat and pram to get,
Yeah.
doing the hospital classes, which can be very helpful in helping you to
Yeah.
know what your hospitals need you to know. They're not enough. They typically are not enough because they don't deal with the more holistic nature of what it is that you're going through. And so learning through programs like mine or calm birth or hypnobirthing can really help you start that process of reflection and seeing it in a
Yeah.
much more profound and developmental way, which is essentially what you're
Yeah.
doing when you become the mother and the
Yeah.
father. That's a bigger version of the man and the woman. So you do
Yeah.
have to grow and you do have to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Did
do
you want to
have
say anything
one.
else?
Yeah, I do have one extra
Mm.
resource that I found to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
After, it was in my process after the course where I started doing my research a little bit late, that I wish I'd had a little bit earlier, and that was a book called Men, Love and Birth by Mark Harris. I'm not sure if
Ah,
you've heard of
okay.
it, Tracy, but he's a British male midwife,
Mm-hmm.
right, which is pretty uncommon, I
Mm.
think, and he directs a lot of his decades of experience in supporting partners in the lead up through pregnancy and into the birth. And it very much highlighted everything that I learned in your course as well, with a lot of really
Mm.
practical, additional practical strategies around, how to be generating more oxytocin, during the pregnancy, and, things to be taking off partners' plates and things to be thinking about and when to do it. It's very oriented towards that male problem solving kind of lens, but
Yeah.
really weaves in as well some of the mindset and emotional challenges that guys are going to face too. So that's
Yeah.
Men, Love and Birth by Mark Harris. It's on Audible, and I think it's a second edition now. I think he's updated it recently. So I would encourage
Beautiful.
at least a lot of guys to go and read that
Mm.
book or listen to that book in the first instance. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so
Mm.
much for your time. And for those out there listening, I hope this has been really helpful to help you to understand what it is that can move the needle in birth. Having a partner who can go from just being a tokenistic bystander to somebody who's significant and instrumental in not just helping her to get through the birth, but also into parenting. And as Matt so beautifully illustrated, to recognize that this is a maturation process.
Mm.
You're growing as in the same way your baby is growing. And that's a beautiful thing. It can be hard, it can be difficult, as Matt experienced, particularly with baby number 2. But it's a journey that is your journey. It's a journey worth taking, and you cannot lose. You cannot go backwards. Okay, you've got to keep growing and changing because that's what your children require. So thanks again for listening, and we hope to see you again next week for another story. Thanks. Have a great week. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Our Transform Your Birth course, both in Canberra and online, is waiting for you to feel calmer and more confident to give birth and change the way you labour. Or why not watch our free masterclass on Keeping Relaxed and Excited About Birth, where we discuss the 3 most important things that can change a birth. You'll find us at our website on www.transformparenting.com.au.